It's something that happened in my hometown the week of my birth. The entire town was destroyed by a tornado. And finally I got to the point in my life where I felt like writing my own version of that catastrophe. So that was the impulse out of which this book grew. There are 14 different main characters whose stories we get, and what I'm going to read tonight is the story of Mary Jean McKinney. All you really need to know is this is in the hours of the aftermath of the tornado. Mary Jean McKinney was caught out in the tornado because she had gone to the place where her new house was being built. Her supposed father, Dr. McKinney, has been constructing this house for her, and it has now been destroyed by the tornado. At the end of the last time we saw Mary Jean McKinney, she was with Herb Gatlin. Herb was digging a well on the property of this new home of hers. As her mind bobbed gently to the surface and her eyelids fluttered open to the absolute darkness surrounding her, Mary Jean's first conscious thought was the worst. She had already died and been buried. Then she remembered the string of moments that had brought her here. Mr. Gatlin dangling her into the well as the twister bore down on them, her flailing about for a handhold and finding the rope ladder just as Mr. Gatlin released his grip, the clumsy descent rung by rung while the air howled overhead, and finally the collapse onto the rocky floor of the well. She wasn't sure whether some trick of her pregnancy had diverted too much blood from her brain, or whether she had simply been overcome by fear. But whatever the case, a lightheadedness had swirled through her thoughts like water circling a drain, and she had fainted. Apparently she'd been unconscious for hours. The rainwater had nearly dried from the front of her dress, even in the chilly dank of the well bottom. Night had fallen, leaving her in the most complete darkness she had ever known. A stiffness had settled into her neck and back, probably from lying so long in a single awkward position, and a chill ached through her bones. Her hip throbbed against a partially buried rock. Her left shoulder burned when she tried to lift her arm. She must have pulled a muscle when she'd first tumbled backward into the hole. The rear of her dress was soaked through as if she'd sat in a puddle, though the ground around her felt only slightly damp beneath her fingers. She shifted her weight and began to grope with her right hand along the curve of the dirt wall, feeling for the ladder. When she found a rung, she pulled herself to her feet and stood there for a minute, fighting a wave of dizziness and nausea. She had to hook her arm through the ladder to keep from sinking back to the floor of the well. The baby had never felt so heavy inside her. Why had Mr. Gatlin left her here alone? She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. The last of her grogginess was lifting, and she felt certain she could scale the ladder in the dark, even in her present condition. But before her foot could find the first rung, a sudden cramping flared through her lower abdomen, and with a quick gasp she doubled over, scraping her cheekbone on the jagged wall. It occurred to her that her face was probably bleeding, but she didn't care. Not now, not while this other thing was happening. She wrapped her arms around her stomach and tried to take a breath, but a sob erupted in its place, followed by a long, low moan. Somewhere inside her, a bare fist was squeezing a white-hot coal, and her whole being seemed to knot itself around that core. She must have hurt herself more seriously than she'd realized. She moaned again, louder this time, as the wave continued through her, battering whatever got in its way. She heard herself wail in the darkness. And then, as abruptly as it had arrived, the wave subsided. The knot released itself, and all she felt was a cold, fresh layering of sweat. "Mr. Gatlin," she cried out, "I need some help." She listened for a response, but none came. In fact, beyond the halting whisper of her own ragged breath, she heard no noises at all. No crickets, no wind, no pattering rain, no katydids buzzing in the leaves, no night owl sounding out its prey. For a second time, she wondered if she might be dead, wondered if her spirit might be lingering in some empty, silent limbo. Nothing in this world was familiar, nothing but the chill and the dark. But something in the brittle stillness finally broke, and sound began to filter through from somewhere, faint and fragmented at first, but growing louder and more clear. Voices. She heard voices floating in the night air. She couldn't pick out any words, but someone was talking, she was sure of it. Two people coming closer. "I'm here," she called. "I'm in the well." The voices stopped. "I'm here," she cried again. She grabbed the rough rope and began to pull herself up the ladder. The climb was difficult without the use of her left arm, but little by little she managed it. She was nearly halfway to the surface when twin beams of light crested the edge of the hole and found her clinging to the crumbling dirt wall.